June 28th, 2026, 11:47 p.m. Somewhere in the flat scrubland of central Crimea, an antenna array the length of 8 football fields begins its nightly activation sequence. Hydraulic arms extend. Guy wires tighten. A cluster of broadband receivers, each the size of a shipping container, rotates slowly toward the northwestern horizon. The Murmansk-BN electronic warfare complex is waking up. 43 kilometers away, a Ukrainian GUR drone operator watches the power signature bloom on his spectrum analyzer. He doesn't reach for a radio. He reaches for a launch key. What you're about to hear isn't a story about a weapon being destroyed. It's a story about a weapon being understood, studied, mapped, fingerprinted, and dismantled from the inside out. The Murmansk-BN was Russia's electromagnetic fist over the Black Sea. For months, it had been strangling Ukrainian naval drone operations, degrading NATO satellite links, and projecting Russian electronic dominance across a theater stretching from the Baltic to the Persian Gulf. Russian commanders called it untouchable. They were wrong. On the night of June 28th into June 29th, 2026, Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, proved exactly how wrong. I'm your host at Steel Horizon, where we analyze the battles that change wars. This is the story of Operation Silent Spectrum. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back to October 2025. That's when GUR Signals intelligence teams first began logging anomalous broadband emissions from the Saky district of central Crimea. Roughly 40 kilometers northeast of Sevastopol, 60 kilometers from the Black Sea coastline. The signal profile was unlike anything previously recorded in the theater. Most Russian tactical EW systems operate in short burst cycles, moving frequencies, masking their position. This was different. This was a system confident in its own invulnerability. Sustained emissions lasting between 4 and 7 hours. Predictable activation windows between 10:30 p.m. and 6 a.m. local time. A fixed geographic footprint that never shifted by more than 300 meters. A system that had never needed to hide because it had never been seriously threatened. GUR analysts began building what they internally called an electronic fingerprint. Every night the system activated Ukrainian SIGINT assets, ground-based receivers along the northern Crimean administrative boundary and airborne collection platforms from Ukrainian-controlled territory, logged its emission profile, frequency bands, power output gradients, antenna slew rates, side lobe patterns that revealed which direction the array was primarily illuminating. The technical detail being accumulated was extraordinary. By December 2025, the GUR had accumulated over 60 nights of continuous data on the Murmansk-BN. They knew this system better than most of its operators did. Here's what the data told them. The Murmansk-BN is not a tactical EW system. It's a strategic one. Designed in the Soviet era and substantially upgraded in the 2010s, it operates across the high-frequency spectrum, roughly 3 to 30 megahertz, at power levels that allow it to affect communications at intercontinental ranges. Ukrainian sources estimate a single Murmansk-BN complex can degrade HF communications across a radius exceeding 5,000 kilometers under optimal atmospheric conditions. Russia operates several of these complexes across its territory, but the one in Crimea had a specific and urgent mission: control the electromagnetic environment over the Black Sea and the adjacent land theater. Every Ukrainian naval drone operating in the western Black Sea, every satellite-guided munition approaching from the west, every NATO airborne surveillance platform in international airspace, all of it sat inside the Murmansk-BN sphere of electromagnetic influence. Which weapon was more dangerous to this system? Precision-guided munitions, long-range drones, or the weeks of SIGINT collection that made the strike possible? Comment below. The answer might genuinely surprise you. The tactical problem for Ukraine was significant. The Murmansk-BN's sheer physical scale made it easy to locate but extraordinarily hard to destroy. The antenna array, when fully deployed, stretched nearly 800 meters across flat terrain. That scale also meant the system required substantial support infrastructure. Buried power feeds drawing from both local grid connections and dedicated generator backup systems, hardened operator bunkers rated to withstand near-miss artillery, fuel storage representing months of autonomous operation, and a layered air defense picket that Russian commanders had placed around what they considered a crown jewel strategic asset. The air defense architecture around the site included a Tor M2 battery providing short-range area coverage out to 12 kilometers, radar-guided ZU-23, 2 autocannon positions at 3 perimeter points capable of engaging low-altitude aerial targets, and what satellite imagery suggested was a man-portable air defense team, MANPADS, stationed at each of the main generator buildings. On paper, this was a serious defensive envelope. Against a conventional strike package, cruise missiles or unguided rockets, it probably would have held. But the GUR wasn't planning a conventional strike. The GUR's operations division spent most of January and February 2026 modeling the site's defensive responses. They had one significant advantage. Months of emissions data had revealed not just the Murmansk-BN's operating cycles, but the Tor M2 battery's radar activation patterns as well. The air defense radar followed its own routine. Brief illumination sweeps timed to the Murmansk-BN's activation sequence, as if the battery operators had synced their watch-keeping schedule to the EW complex they were protecting. That synchronization was about to be their undoing. I spent hours going through the available signals data from this period, and one detail kept nagging at me: the Tor M2 radar activation gap. Every night, between approximately 11:45 p.m. and 12:10 a.m. local time, right at the peak of the Murmansk-BN startup sequence, when the EW complex was drawing maximum power, the Tor M2 fire control radar went dark for between 8 and 22 minutes. Our best assessment is that the power draw from the Murmansk-BN startup was affecting local grid stability, forcing the air defense battery to cycle its radar through a reset sequence. A 22-minute window. Not much by any conventional measure. But in modern drone warfare, it's an eternity. Stay with me, because what happens next dismantles the entire concept of an untouchable target. By March 2026, the GUR had the outline of a strike plan. But here's the obstacle that nearly derailed the entire operation before a single drone launched: the long-range UAV assets Ukraine would need for the primary strike package. Specifically, the Beaver-type drones carrying thermobaric-shaped payloads had a navigation vulnerability. The Murmansk-BN, when operating at full power, generated sufficient HF interference to potentially degrade GPS signal quality within a 40-kilometer radius of the antenna array. In other words, the weapon Ukraine needed to destroy the jammer might be disrupted by the jammer itself during final approach. The target was actively defending itself against the attack mechanism before the attack had even been conceived. The solution took 6 weeks to engineer. GUR technical teams, working with Ukrainian defense industry partners, developed a hybrid guidance protocol combining INS, inertial navigation, with preloaded terrain correlation data derived from high-resolution satellite imagery of the target area. The drones would not rely on GPS for the final 30 kilometers of their approach. They would navigate by dead reckoning and terrain matching, using the landscape itself as a reference grid. It was technically demanding, operationally risky, and it had never been tested in combat conditions against a jamming environment of this scale. But it worked. The full strike package was finalized in late May 2026 and rehearsed, using scaled terrain mock-ups and simulated signal environments through mid-June. The plan called for a 3-wave approach. Wave 1, a diversionary FPV drone swarm, 12 drones, tasked with suppressing the ZU-23 gun positions at the site's northern perimeter. These FPV units would launch from a forward staging area approximately 22 kilometers from the target, flying at low altitude to stay below the Tor M2's engagement envelope. Wave 2, the primary strike element. 6 Beaver-type long-range UAVs carrying thermobaric payloads, each loaded with a shaped charge optimized for attacking large antenna infrastructure. Wave 3, a follow-on FPV element. 8 additional drones, reserved for battle damage assessment strikes on any infrastructure that survived the primary hit. Layered, sequenced, and ruthlessly disciplined. The thermobaric payload choice was deliberate. The Murmansk-BN's antenna array is not armored. Its value is in its precision engineering, kilometers of carefully tensioned wire, specialized insulators, matching networks tuned to specific frequency ranges, feed line systems calibrated to within fractions of a wavelength. A thermobaric detonation doesn't need to hit a hardened target directly. It generates an overpressure wave across a wide area. A single thermobaric charge detonating near the antenna feed network could destroy the electrical matching systems that allow the array to function, without necessarily severing every physical wire. The GUR wanted to fry the system's brain, not just cut its limbs. How many Russian EW assets did Ukraine destroy or degrade in Crimea during the 2026 campaign? A4 systems, B7 systems, C11 systems? The answer is at the end of this video, June 28th. The weather over Crimea was the first serious problem of execution. A low-pressure system sitting over the Black Sea had been pushing low cloud cover northward across the peninsula since midday. By 9 p.m., ceiling at the target area was below 300 meters. The forward drone team's meteorological assessment gave a narrow window, between 11:30 p.m. and 1:15 a.m., where upper-level wind shear was predicted to temporarily push the cloud base above 400 meters, just barely sufficient for the Beaver-type UAVs to maintain terrain correlation accuracy during their approach. If the window closed early, the primary strike drones would be navigating terrain they couldn't see, against margins that left no room for error. The GUR strike commander made the call at 10:52 p.m. Proceed. At 11:31 p.m., the Murmansk-BN began its nightly activation sequence. Ukrainian SIGINT operators logged the first emission spike at 11:33 p.m. Power output climbing through known initialization stages, each one documented across 60 nights of prior collection. The TOR-M2 fire control radar went into its reset cycle at 11:44 p.m., as expected. The window was open. At 11:47 p.m., the forward FPV team, 8 operators working from a mobile unit concealed in agricultural terrain, launched the first wave. 12 FPV drones. Low and fast, terrain following at altitudes between 15 and 40 meters, approaching the target's northern perimeter on a heading that kept them in the radar shadow of a low ridge line 3 kilometers from the gun positions. The first ZU-23 position opened fire at 11:51 p.m. Its operators had detected the approaching drones visually. A night vision-equipped sentry spotted the thermal signatures and called it in before the radar had any picture. 3 FPV units went down in the first 30 seconds, shredded by 23 mm cannon fire, but 9 continued toward the gun line. Subscribe to Steel Horizon if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what happened in those next 4 minutes rewrites the textbook on fixed-site air defense. The gun crews, focused entirely on the incoming FPV swarm at low altitude to their north, never detected the Beaver-type UAVs that had launched from their staging area, 61 kilometers to the north. At 11:38 p.m., 6 drones, flying at 240 meters altitude, navigating on inertial and terrain correlation guidance, crossing into the GPS-degraded zone at 11:49 p.m. without a single navigation deviation. The hybrid guidance system performed exactly as its engineers had promised. The Murmansk-BN's jamming, designed to blind incoming threats, couldn't touch a drone that wasn't listening to GPS at all. At 11:54 p.m., the TOR-M2 fire control radar came back online. Its operators immediately detected multiple inbound contacts at medium altitude, contacts that hadn't existed on their scope 10 minutes earlier. They engaged. 2 of the 6 Beaver-type UAVs were intercepted, one by a TOR-M2 missile at a range of approximately 7 kilometers, detonating in a fireball that Ukrainian SIGINT operators logged as a secondary loss. One more. The trailing drone in the formation was struck by a MANPADS team near the southern generator complex. 4 drones continued inbound. Put yourself in the position of the Murmansk-BN site commander at that precise moment. Your air defense radar was down for 10 minutes during peak threat exposure. You've just come back online to find you're under simultaneous attack from 2 altitude bands and multiple vectors. Your gun positions at the northern perimeter are suppressed, crews pinned or dead. Your TOR battery has expended 2 missiles and is starting its reload cycle. And 4 large UAVs are 30 seconds from your antenna array, navigating on a guidance system you have no countermeasure for. What would you have done? The first thermobaric detonation occurred at 11:57 p.m. It struck the northern feed network, the section of the array responsible for transmitting in the 12 to 18 megahertz band. The overpressure wave propagated outward across a radius of approximately 90 meters, destroying insulator strings, collapsing antenna mast sections, and detonating a secondary explosion in an above-ground cable junction box that carried power feeds to the entire northern antenna cluster. The secondary explosion was larger than the primary. 11 seconds later, the second drone hit. This one struck closer to the central equipment building, the hardened structure housing the transmitter modules and control systems. The thermobaric payload didn't penetrate the building's concrete walls, but the overpressure through the ventilation ducting was sufficient to damage rack-mounted equipment inside, and the fireball at the building's western wall ignited surface-laid cable runs feeding antenna sections on the downwind side. Drones 3 and 4 arrived within 23 seconds of each other. Drone 3's payload detonated against the array's central guy wire anchoring system, a cluster of buried concrete anchors and steel cable runs that maintained precise geometric tension across the entire antenna field. The overpressure shredded the cable runs and unseated several anchor blocks. Antenna wire tension collapsed across 3 array sections simultaneously, 300 meters of carefully calibrated wire dropping in seconds. Drone 4, the last Beaver in the formation, struck the fuel storage area serving the backup generators. The resulting fire was fed by approximately 14,000 liters of diesel fuel stored in above-ground bunded tanks. The tanks were not armored. The fire was immediate and total. Ukrainian SIGINT operators confirmed what their instruments had already told them. The Murmansk-BN's emissions ceased at 11:58 p.m., 1 minute after the first impact. The electromagnetic fist over the Black Sea opened, went dark, and did not close again. The fire burned for 11 hours and 19 minutes. Satellite imagery collected by commercial providers on the morning of June 29th and subsequently analyzed by open-source intelligence researchers showed catastrophic structural damage across the northern and central sections of the antenna array. At least 40% of the antenna wire runs had collapsed. The central equipment building showed evidence of fire damage through its roof. The generator complex was a total loss. Nothing remained above the concrete slab. UNITED-24 published fragmentary imagery and intercept summaries in early July 2026 that confirmed the broad outlines of the damage assessment, though the precise details of how the GUR operators had solved the GPS degradation problem, the core of the operation's technical achievement, remained classified. What this operation represents, beyond the immediate tactical outcome, is a shift in how Ukraine approaches electronic warfare as a target set. For the first phase of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine's focus was necessarily tactical, destroying vehicles, disrupting command nodes, cutting supply lines. By 2026, Ukraine had developed the intelligence infrastructure, the technical capability, and above all, the operational patience to go after Russia's strategic EW architecture. That's not just a tactical success, that's a doctrinal shift. That's what a military looks like when it learns faster than its adversary. The Murmansk-BN's destruction created a 72-hour window of degraded Russian electronic warfare coverage over the northwestern Black Sea. Ukrainian naval drone units exploited it within hours. The Magura V-5 naval surface drone, Ukraine's primary maritime strike asset in the Black Sea theater, operates on radio frequency links that the Murmansk-BN had been actively jamming since its deployment to Crimea. With the jammer down, the RF environment over the Black Sea improved dramatically. Ukrainian Naval Drone Command launched a second Magura strike wave towards Sevastopol at 3:41 a.m. on June 29th, before the wreckage at the Murmansk-BN site had even finished burning. Here's the take that'll probably earn us some pushback in the comments. Russia's decision to deploy a strategic asset like the Murmansk-BN to a fixed, precisely locatable site in Crimea, rather than operating it from mobile platforms or from Russian-controlled territory beyond Ukrainian long-range strike range, reflected institutional arrogance masquerading as strategic confidence. Russian commanders believed the site was untouchable, not because they had done rigorous analysis of Ukrainian strike capabilities, but because they assumed Ukraine lacked the sophistication to attempt it. That assumption was never tested, until it was. And it cost them one of their most valuable electromagnetic assets in the theater for the better part of a year. The Magura strike wave that launched in the early hours of June 29th consisted of 7 vessels. The improved RF environment allowed Ukrainian operators to maintain stable data links at ranges that had previously been marginal and unreliable. Russian naval force protection assets in Sevastopol Bay, operating with reduced EW support and degraded communications, scrambled to intercept. 5 of the 7 Magura drones were intercepted. 2 were not. Ukrainian General Staff declined to confirm what those 2 drones struck. OSINT researchers analyzing commercial satellite imagery of Sevastopol in the days following the operation noted the absence of at least one surface combatant from its normal berth. A vessel previously documented at a maintenance pier showed blast damage indicators consistent with a shaped charge warhead strike against its hull below the waterline. Ukrainian sources estimate the damage placed the vessel out of operational service for a minimum of 4 to 6 months, a secondary dividend of the Murmansk-BN strike, a bonus paid out because the EW gap had been created. If you believe tactical patience wins wars, and this operation is evidence that it does, type Steel Horizon in the comments. Because what Ukraine demonstrated on June 28th wasn't overwhelming firepower, it was discipline. 8 months of it. The 72-hour EW gap also had effects beyond the naval domain. Ukrainian Air Force operations in the northwestern theater noted measurably improved performance from their active radar jamming assets during the window. The Murmansk-BN had been contributing to a background HF interference environment that subtly degraded Ukrainian airborne electronic attack effectiveness, even at altitudes and frequencies not directly in its primary emission band. With it gone, even temporarily, Ukrainian SEAD operations gained operational margin that they immediately put to use. Russian forces attempted to compensate for the loss. Available records indicate Moscow repositioned at least one Krasuka-4 mobile EW system toward the Crimean theater within 36 hours of the Murmansk-BN strike. The Krasuka-4 is a capable tactical system, effective against airborne radar platforms and certain communications frequencies, but it operates in a completely different spectral range than the Murmansk-BN. It cannot replicate strategic HF jamming at intercontinental range. Repositioning a Krasuka-4 to cover the Murmansk-BN strategic mission is like deploying a Coast Guard cutter to replace a destroyer. They both float. They are not the same instrument. What would NATO have done differently in targeting a hardened strategic EW site with this level of air defense coverage? Comment your analysis below. The defensive architecture around the Murmansk-BN, while ultimately defeated, was a genuine planning challenge. The Tor M2 battery performed reasonably well by the numbers. 2 of 6 primary strike drones intercepted, 3 of 12 FPV suppression drones neutralized. The site's defenders were not incompetent. The problem was a vulnerability they could not have known existed without studying their own power infrastructure as carefully as the GUR had studied it from 40 kilometers away. By the end of July 2026, fragmentary satellite imagery from the Saky district and signals data published by UNITED-24 confirmed what Ukrainian sources had stated since late June. The Murmansk-BN complex was not operational. No emissions had been detected from the site in over 4 weeks. Reconstruction would require not just physical repair of the antenna infrastructure, itself a months-long engineering project requiring specialized cable, precision insulator hardware, and heavy lifting equipment, but replacement of the transmitter modules in the central equipment building, procurement of the specific high-frequency antenna wire that forms the array's radiating elements, and complete reconstruction of the generator complex. Conservative Ukrainian military intelligence estimates placed full system restoration at 8 to 14 months, assuming Russia prioritized it and could source the materials. In a war where construction resources, skilled systems, engineers, and heavy equipment are all under sustained pressure from Western sanctions and continuous Ukrainian strike operations, that estimate may prove optimistic for Moscow. Something about the timeline of this operation that stayed with me. Specifically, the 6 weeks spent engineering the hybrid guidance solution around the GPS degradation problem, is that it represents a category of Ukrainian military adaptation that rarely gets the attention it deserves. The dramatic strikes on Russian armor convoys and supply depots are easy to film and easy to explain. The months of patient technical work that makes those strikes possible is invisible and unglamorous. But it is that harder-to-see work. The engineers in workshops, the SIGINT analysts at spectrum analyzers at 3 in the morning, the guidance software developers running simulation after simulation, that is systematically winning this war by increments. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. Will Russia rebuild this capability in Crimea, or has Ukraine permanently changed the calculus for stationing strategic EW assets on the peninsula? Comment why yes if you think Russia restores it within a year. Comment no if you think it's gone from Crimea for the duration of the conflict. We read every comment, and this one is worth debating. Real tactics, real consequences. Steel Horizon. The lesson of the Murmansk-BN strike is not, ultimately, about drones or thermobaric payloads or the specific details of a 22-minute air defense radar gap. The lesson is about what becomes possible when you commit to understanding your adversary's capabilities more thoroughly than they understand their own vulnerabilities. Ukraine's GUR spent 8 months building an intelligence picture that most military organizations would have considered disproportionate investment for a single target. They were right to build it. That 8 months of patience paid off in a 72-hour window of operational freedom over the Black Sea, a naval drone strike against Sevastopol harbor, the confirmed removal of Russia's primary strategic HF jamming asset from the Crimean theater for the better part of a year, and a lesson in signals intelligence tradecraft that military analysts will be studying for a generation. The answer to our earlier quiz, how many Russian EW assets did Ukraine destroy or degrade in Crimea during the 2026 campaign? The answer is B7 systems. Beyond the Murmansk-BN, Ukrainian GUR and Air Force operations through the first half of 2026 struck or forced the displacement of at least 6 additional EW complexes across Crimea and adjacent Russian-occupied territory, including Krasuka 2 and Krasuka 4 mobile systems, and at least 2 Zytel GPS jamming stations that had been disrupting Ukrainian drone operations across the southern theater. The Murmansk-BN was the largest and most strategically significant, but it was part of a systematic and deliberate campaign to degrade Russia's entire electromagnetic advantage, not a single opportunistic strike. 3 questions worth sitting with after everything you've heard today. Was the GUR's decision to spend 8 months on signals intelligence collection, rather than attempting an earlier, less precise strike, the right tactical choice? Or did that patience have operational costs of its own? Could Russian site commanders have prevented this by implementing better power management protocols to eliminate the air defense radar gap? And if so, why didn't they? And what would you have done differently if you were commanding the Murmansk-BN site's defensive architecture, knowing that somewhere beyond your perimeter, a patient adversary was building your electromagnetic fingerprint one night at a time? There are no easy answers. That's what makes modern warfare worth studying seriously. Subscribe to Steel Horizon, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The scrubland around Saky is quiet now. Somewhere in the debris field, 800 meters of collapsed antenna wire reflects the morning sun. The hydraulic arms that once reached toward the sky are buckled and still. The diesel fire burned out long ago. But the EW gap it created changed the maritime balance over the Black Sea for months. And the operational lesson it taught both sides will shape how Russia stations its strategic assets and how Ukraine finds and removes them for the rest of this war and beyond. Stay vigilant.